Okay, so this is an established mature peach tree. It's got multiple scaffolds leading off of it, which means it's pruned to be an open vase tree. By scaffold, we're talking about these main branches coming off of it here. And we'll talk a little bit about how you do annual pruning for fruit production. This tree has been pruned every year, and it's been pruned to produce fruit. So the tools we like to use when we're pruning, we'll have longer hand loppers. There's a whole bunch of different kinds you can buy. But anything, the longer it is, the more leverage you're going to have. So if you're going to make really big cuts, you might want longer ones. I like this length just because it's easy to hold and it's pretty comfortable. Sometimes in peaches we use smaller hand pruners if you're going to get it into like really big detail work. You can get away with just doing it with these as well. So these two trees side by side, the one on the right has already been pruned and the one on the left is unpruned. So you have to remember that these trees are all pruned for commercial fruit production. So we prune them very intensely and they don't always make great shade trees. We also have to remember that by cutting, you increase the vigor. So in the summer, these will put off a lot of new growth, but maybe not the most appealing if you have just a backyard tree for shade. So when we produce fruit off of a peach tree, peaches only fruit off of first year growth. So that was last year's green growth. On peach trees, it's pretty simple to see what is fruiting growth because it looks much different. The fruiting growth is slightly red in color as opposed to the grayish dull bark. The first year growth is red and you can see the fruit buds on them. The fruit buds are just the fuzzy bits right here coming off of the first year growth. So there's 2 fruit buds at each node with a leaf bud in the middle, coming off of the 1 year growth. So for example, you have 2-year-old branch coming off of it here. You can tell because it's darker in color, it doesn't have that nice reddish color to it, with 1-year-old growth coming off of it. So our goals for pruning for fruit production are to have the fruiting wood, just 1-year-old growth coming off of the scaffold. So that's our goal for pruning, is to have as much 1-year-old growth coming straight off of the main scaffold. So when we're doing our pruning, we're trying to get rid of 2nd year growth to make room for next year's crop. So as we make a cut here to take off the 2nd year growth, it's going to encourage a new growth this coming summer, which will be next year's crop. So we're trying to cut off the older wood to make room for new wood. We're trying to leave fruiting wood for this upcoming year. And you also want to make sure that you're trying to open the tree up for as much sunlight as possible. So the sun is what's going to ripen this year's crop and will also help develop fruit buds for next year. We do this open vase style. It has multiple scaffolds and it's shaped almost like an upside down umbrella. So what we're trying to do is maximize the amount of sunlight that the tree can intercept. So when we're pruning the tree and when we're training a tree to get into the shape, all we've done is try to select these scaffolds that are spaced apart relatively evenly and can fill up the space without causing shade. So the things that cause shade are branches that are going straight up in the air, branches that are going back into the center of the tree. So we're really trying to open up the center of the tree and keep things going wide as opposed to up. So that's always something you think about when you're pruning. As far as how much wood we're leaving on the tree, with peach trees, if we're doing a commercial pruning for fruit production, we end up taking off at least 60% of the fruit. So on a tree this size, we might want to crop it to 100, maybe 120 peaches per tree to get good size. So we pointed out the fruit buds that are on this 1 year growth. On a branch this size, that's probably about 12 inches, I would probably only leave 2 fruit on here. If it's much more than 2 fruit, they won't size well and you'll have low quality. On a bigger branch, such as this one back here, which is a really nice fruiting branch, could hold around 3 peaches on that one. So each one of these fruit buds, if we don't freeze out, could possibly have 1 to 2 peaches on it. And there's probably 40 buds on that. So you really don't need that much fruiting wood on a tree to have a commercial crop. So as we're going through, what I'm looking for on one scaffold is how much fruiting wood is on there and how much of this older growth I can take off. So we like to make renewing cuts off of the scaffold, which just means on this branch here, I cropped it last year. This is 2-year-old wood with fruiting wood on it, which means I cropped it last year. So I'm going to do a renewal cut there. This means in the summer, there'll be a bud around here that's going to break and cause new growth, and that's our fruiting wood for next year. So this would be a renewal cut. So I like to go through and do a lot of the cut off a lot of the second year growth just to encourage more for next year. So I've taken off a decent amount, and now we're down to just thinning cuts since we don't need that many branches. This tree did not have that much growth last year. It's got some really good ones. The best fruiting growth is about 12 to 24 inches long and about as thick as a pencil. And ideally it would be growing off to the side and not straight up, but as long as it's really nice fruiting wood, I'll kind of compromise and let that stay. Really small fruiting growth like this is not ideal. At most you can grow one peach off of here, but it's very weak and it will be low quality fruit. So we're looking more for fruiting branches like these two here. Sometimes you don't have an option. So as long as you're leaving some for fruit and you've cut old ones off to grow fruit for next year, you can kind of go through and estimate how many peaches you're going to want on there. So here's one nice fruiting here. This branch has split. There's nothing around it, so I want to save it for fruit. But I don't like it going straight up in the air, so I'll try and pick one that's in a better position. Now up towards the top, I like to limit the tree's reach so that I don't have to use ladders. So I'll cut it back to something a little bit shorter. So in this section here, there's 3 relatively nice fruiting wood, spaced pretty well apart. They're all kind of growing off to the side, not straight up in the air. This one here doesn't have much on it, but there's nothing else around, so I'm going to leave it. Now sometimes as we're pruning these ones that are very long, this is called a tipping cut, where you cut the top 1/4 to 1/3 of the branch off. And that's to help strengthen this branch, and it also just helps knock off a few of those fruiting buds so you have less thinning to do in the spring. Down in this area, we had quite a bit of growth for this tree, at least last summer, so I have lots of options I can choose from when I want to leave fruiting wood. This is the superior fruiting wood because it's not growing straight up in the air. This one will cause a lot of shade, so I'm going to do a thinning cut to get rid of that one. I'll also like to thin out a lot of these little ones that are going underneath the scaffold because they're just going to get shaded by the tree. So the more sunlight your buds can get, the higher quality fruit you're going to get. So you want to try and get ones that aren't underneath the tree. So for this scaffold, I would say this one's finished. So we want to make sure the center part of this tree is relatively open so we can get as much sunlight as possible. The branches that are coming into the middle, like this one, are going to cause a lot of shade. Sometimes, particularly in apple trees and sometimes in peach trees here, we can get a sunburn that happens in this area. So symptoms of sunburn are kind of like the cracked bark. In that case, you might want to leave some, but for the most part, especially in peaches, we're better to just take them out and get as much sunlight as possible. As far as where to leave the fruit, we like to have fruit dispersed relatively evenly throughout the tree. One of the things you don't want to happen is to have all your fruit only be at the top of the tree. So you'd like to have fruit throughout the whole tree. However, when you have a lot of branches that are going underneath the scaffold itself, this scaffold is going to shade these branches. So you do just as well to take those off because they won't perform and they won't have high quality fruit. This branch here is down lower on the tree, but it's not creating shade, and it's nice fruiting wood on 1-year-old growth, so this one would be perfect to leave. So sometimes in trees we get root suckers that are coming off from the rootstock. The rootstock of a tree is the part that's growing underground. So sometimes those buds will break around ground level or sometimes just above ground level and they'll grow. We like to cut those off just to simplify the tree, and it's the wrong variety of peach, so we just get rid of them. So this block of trees here is pruned to a perpendicular V as opposed to the open vase that we were looking at before. Perpendicular V just means that it has 2 scaffolds per tree that are coming into the row. So instead of the open vase that could have 4, 5, or 6 scaffolds, it just has 2. The benefit of this kind of pruning system, if you can tell throughout the row, is you can fit more trees in closer together. So you don't have to make room for branches that are going into the row. They're all in a line with the branches coming away from each other, and you can fit a lot more trees per acre in this system.